Okay, so in this third part of the lecture, I'm going to introduce to you the model of the general environment. So I'm just going to walk you through what we're talking about when we talk about the general environment. So one of the key things when we're doing environmental analysis is trying to identify what represents opportunities and what represents threats for an organisation. So you've probably heard about this concept of SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. And when we're looking at the opportunities and threats section of that environmental analysis, we're really concerned with what's happening in the general environment or the external environment for the organisation. So when we talk about an opportunity, we're talking about things in the general environment that, if we're able to exploit them, would be able to help us as an organisation achieve our competitive outcomes. Similarly, when we talk about a threat, we're talking about things in the external environment that may hinder our organisation's ability to achieve strategic competitiveness. Now, it's really important that you understand these two concepts because they really do shape the way that we view the outside world. And so when we engage in this analysis of the general environment, we try to identify trends that might represent opportunities, or also trends that might represent a threat, and then we develop a strategy that helps us to either take advantage of those opportunities or to minimise a threat that the organisation might be facing. So again, I'll come back to this figure, and this is the figure that summarises for us the external environment of the organisation. So again, when we talk about general environment or broad environment or macro environment, what we're talking about is looking at the sorts of factors that are in the outside of this figure. So we're talking about an analysis of economic conditions, socio-cultural conditions, global conditions, technological conditions, political legal conditions, and demographic conditions that may impact on society, on the industry, or our business, and therefore impact upon our strategy. Now, if you've done things like Introduction to Management or Principles of Marketing, you've probably seen similar models to this that talk about broad or macro environmental factors. And there are different terms or words that are used from one context to the next. It doesn't really matter what model you use, as long as you're looking at the right level of analysis. So again, these are just general guides for where you might look for trends. It's not to say that in every situation there is a demographic issue that the organisation faces or there is a socio-cultural issue. It's saying that if you're looking to see where trends might be occurring, you look in these different sectors or parts of the external environment. So when we talk about the general environment, we're talking about the dimensions of a broad society that influence the industry and the firms within that industry. Okay, so we're talking about very broad factors, things that impact upon everyone, not just upon one organisation. Now, in general, when we talk about this sort of general environment or macro environment, we tend to talk about 6 or 7 different types of trends that might occur. Now, I just want to be really clear here. These are just generic categories, okay? So these are just categories where we may see a trend. It's not to say that trends always occur in these areas or that a trend in every one of these areas has to be identified. It's just saying to you as a manager, when we start looking at the world around us, we might want to look at the demographic changes that are happening or the economic conditions that we're experiencing or the socio-cultural environment in which we're embedded and see whether there's anything in that environment that impacts upon us as an organisation. So when we think about our case analysis that we're going to do in assessment item 3, one of the first things you're going to do in your analysis is to look at these sorts of factors and identify 2 or 3 environmental trends that you think are having a major impact on that organisation. So again, we're really looking at some key factors here that might influence and shape our strategy. We don't have to talk about everyone, we're just looking at the 2 or 3 factors that have the most impact upon our organisation. So what I'm going to do quickly is just run through and give you a very broad overview about what these types of areas mean. And then in the last part of the lecture, I'm just going to talk about 2 examples of an environmental change and how this might impact upon a sector of the economy. Okay, so these are just broad categories that you might look at. So the first segment of the environment that we talk about are demographic factors, or the demographic segment. And when we talk about demographics, what we're really talking about is population statistics. Any market represents a population of people. And so when we talk about demographics, we're trying to understand the makeup of that market. We're trying to think about the number of people, their age profile, their level of education and literacy. All of these factors might have a major impact upon the way that they interact with our organisation and our products. And so demographics are, for my mind, a very important part of understanding business processes. So what are some of the demographic factors that we might want to think about? One of the most obvious is the notion of population size. When we're looking at identifying markets and trying to think about their attractiveness, we want to get an idea about how big is the population. Now, while the total population figure might be important, we're really interested in that segment of the population who's going to buy our particular product. So for example, if you think about a country like India, which currently has about 1.2, 1.3 billion people, many of those people still live in very poor conditions, often below the poverty line. And so if we're thinking about, say, middle class consumers, only about 300 million people in that total population of 1.3 billion would be classed as middle class. Now, that's still a very large market, but we have to be right in thinking about what the population actually looks like. So when we think about population, we think about the size, the number of people in the population. We might think about the age structure of the population. What is the average age? How many people do we have under the age of 25? How many people do we have in the 25 to 50 age bracket? Because again, these age brackets are really critical in understanding the types of products that people are likely to purchase. We also need to think about the issue of geographic distribution, okay? Because the more consolidated and concentrated a population is, the easier it is for us to service those markets. So if you think about a country like Australia, Australia's population is actually consolidated in quite tight geographical areas. You know, if you look at the Greater Melbourne area, the Greater Sydney area and the Greater Brisbane area, it's all the way down to the Gold Coast and up to the Sunshine Coast, you find that those small geographical areas account for over half of Australia's population. So again, understanding how distributed the population is really important. That's very different from, say, a country like France, where there are only 2 cities with a population of over 1 million people, even though the total population of the country is more like 60 to 70 million. So geographical distribution is important. We also need to think about things like income distribution. How is income distributed between people within the population? Because income tends to have a big influence on purchasing power. So if you look at a country like Saudi Arabia, the GDP per capita, so if we divide GDP by the number of people in the population, gives us quite a high figure of GDP per capita of something like 36,000 per person. But we know that most of that wealth is actually consolidated in the top 1% of the population, and that most people live on a much lower GDP figure than that. A second area we might be interested in is the economic sector. Now, again, businesses are embedded within a broader economic system, and changes in that economic system can have a major impact on the profitability of our organisation. So when we're thinking about our strategy, we need to think about the overall direction of the economy. We need to think about things like inflation rates and interest rates. We need to think about the trade profile of the country in which we're operating, or any country we might want to operate in the future. So for example, if you think about Australia, we've just had a period of about 30 years of significant economic growth. In fact, of all the OECD countries, the Australian long-term average in terms of performance has been the strongest. We have quite low unemployment rates, much lower than what you would see in Europe, and we have very low interest rates, in fact historically low interest rates compared to what we would have seen a generation ago. So all of these factors have a relatively positive impact on the economy. And so as a result, Australia at the moment is a very positive place to do business. This is very different from what we might see if we looked at a country like Greece. Greece has endured a number of years of economic hardship, mainly because they've really struggled since integration into the European economy. So what we see in that context is that people are living with significant debts, there's not a lot of government investment, and the economy is actually shrinking, not getting larger. So again, when we're understanding what we should do as a business, we need to understand these economic factors. We need to think about the political legal factors that might impact upon our organisation. Again, businesses cannot operate outside the legal system. And so as a business, we need to understand what's happening with the laws in the different jurisdictions that we might operate. So for example, many businesses today have to think about not only national laws or local laws, but also international laws that might impact upon their business. We need to think about things like laws around competition and monopoly. Most jurisdictions in the world take a very dim view of monopoly competition, and as a result have laws in place to break up businesses as they get too large. We need to think about labour laws. If we're employing people in different countries, we need to know about what the differences in labour laws actually are and the conditions under which we can employ people. And also tied up with legal is the aspect of political. Governments have a big impact on business, and as businesses get bigger and bigger, they increasingly come under the attention of governments all around the world. And so what we need to do is understand what's happening in government policy and how might government policy impact upon our organisation. So for example, the Australian government is currently trying to encourage and invest in innovation, and they've launched what's recently been called the Innovation Agenda. And so what this means is that they're supporting businesses who are trying to engage in innovative activities. So if you're an organisation that does that, then that creates a positive environment for you to operate in. If we look at America at the moment, there's a lot of uncertainty in the legal system within the United States because people are not sure how the Trump administration is going to impact upon things like immigration law, laws around, say, healthcare, and even the tax system. We also need to think about the socio-cultural environment in which we operate. Social change can have quite a significant impact upon the success and viability of our industry. If you look at things like the home services sector, so things like cleaning services, gardening services, these have been positively impacted by the fact that we have an increasing number of women in the workforce, or the fact that people work longer hours and have less time to actually do their own gardening or to clean their own home. So again, these changes in socio-cultural trends can really open up new market opportunities, but can also have a detrimental impact upon some other traditional industries. So the sorts of things we might think about are things like workforce diversity, the moral and ethical standards that we see within a particular country. If you think about it at the moment, many people are concerned about things like environmental impacts, and this does tend to impact upon the way they consume and purchase products. So again, we're trying to see if there are any socio-cultural changes that may impact upon our organisation. Another area where we look is, of course, technology. Business and technology are intricately linked, and certainly the future of many businesses are really tied to how well they can integrate new technologies into their organisation's operational processes. Think about how many businesses have embraced mobile technologies, and the use of mobile phones is not only a platform for providing information to consumers, but as a place for consumers to purchase products and interact with their products. So again, we need to be mindful of what changes are happening in technology, what new technology might come into the marketplace and create new opportunities. So again, as battery technology improves, the viability of electric cars has greatly increased, and we're seeing that companies like Tesla are having a lot of success today targeting and selling products to people who are interested in green-powered cars. We also know that there's a lot more e-commerce being done today, that the internet is a major way for us to interact and do business with consumers, and so being able to use that technology becomes really critical. And certainly e-commerce is leading to a whole range of new business models. And then we also need to think about the global environment. And we need to think about the trends and changes that are happening in our global world and think about how they might impact upon us as a business. Again, whether we like it or not, we're probably living in an era now where the American economy and America as a country is losing its standing in the global marketplace. Other countries like India and China are rapidly increasing in their importance, and it's likely that the future of all of our prosperity is going to be tied to these markets and how successful those markets actually are. And so when we're looking to go into business, particularly when we're looking to do business globally, we need to be mindful of what all of these different global trends might look like and how they might impact on our organisation. So again, when we talk about global aspects, we need to think about cultural differences, language differences, and how we might overcome some of those differences if we're going to do business across borders. So what I've done there is just give you a very quick overview of what some of the major categories of environmental trends might look like. Okay, so again, these are just places where you might look for change. It doesn't mean that change is happening in all those areas. What I'm going to do in the final part of the lecture is just introduce 2 environmental trends and then talk you through what those trends might mean in terms of a business context.